my personal experience was learning how to care for my body in the process of actually learning what a cycle is and what the phases are. And so if someone was to begin the process of cycle tracking, what would be your guidance for them? And I know you have a free offering around that too as well. So plug that as well.
Yes, I do. Yeah. So about 15 years ago, I discovered something called fertility awareness method. And I actually read Tony Weschler's book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility. I can see it on my bookshelf. So I actually read that book, and it's a big book. I read it cover to cover, and it changed my life. I had never heard of fertility awareness or cycle tracking before. It was not a trending thing at that time. Let me just tell you, no one I knew was cycle tracking. Now it's a thing that you can find all over TikTok or all over Instagram. However, at that time, it was completely new to me. And I was in midwifery school and I was learning also about fertility. There were a couple of other books that we were suggested to read that also talked about this same concept. It's also called natural family planning. It's a different way of looking at it. And so some people who are more oriented towards conception or who might be kind of like advocates of contraception will refer to it as natural family planning. However, you can work with that method as contraception, and that has been my sole form of contraception for the last 15 years. So I will say, and I haven't had any babes, I can't be like, oh, it's 100% effective. But the studies have shown that fertility awareness, when used correctly, is over 99% effective. That's actually like more, I believe, than the birth control pill. I can't remember what the exact numbers are for the birth control pill. I didn't pull up those numbers before this, but I believe it's actually higher. So it's like, it's a real thing. What I would suggest is checking out fertility awareness. And so fertility awareness is really simple. It's so simple. It does take time. It takes a patience. It takes consistency in order to actually start to implement it. But it's really simple. It is just tracking signs in your body. So you are literally tracking every single day your basal body temperature. So you use a basal body temperature thermometer and you're tracking your basal body temperature and you're putting it onto a chart. And I do in my free guide, I have like a starter chart for folks. So my free guide is at herbalwomb.com/track your cycle. And it's literally a guide to fertility awareness, starting it in your life. And I've had people come to me and tell me that they started to use it over a year ago. That's how they're working with contraception. They've come off of their birth control. They're now using fertility awareness. And I just love that even just using that guide. I mean, some people need extra support, but you can use the guide if you want to. And I've got lots of resources on it too. So that is a great starter guide. So on there, I do have the chart. So you're going to track your basal body temperature and you're going to track your cervical mucus. Those are the two non-negotiables. And your cervical mucus is literally like, I usually just track it every time I go to the bathroom. I just check on my toilet paper for anything that's there. And some people they'll actually place their fingers inside their vagina to check out the cervical mucus that way too. But you just want to be doing either the toilet tissue or the internal check. And you want to do the same thing the whole time. You're not going to be switching back and forth between those two. And you literally are just checking for what's going on there. Everybody is different in terms of what their patterns are. And so you'll get to know your own body while you do this. Some days you're going to have your dry days, which for you, they're dry for you. What that looks like for you, it doesn't mean that you're paper dry and you feel like sandpaper. It could be that there's some kind of like a little bit of discharge there, but it is simply like your dryness. And then as you come towards your fertile window, as you head towards ovulation, because of course we have these phases of our cycle. And I know that's a whole new thing for some people too, but you share about that, I believe, a lot on your podcast. So anybody listening to this probably already knows about the phases. But we've got menstruation, we've got our follicular phase, we've got the ovulation, and then we've got our luteal phase. So that's the general menstrual cycle. As we're in our follicular phase, we're usually having our, we menstruate. Obviously, that's not dry. You can keep track of your blood, like how heavy your blood is and what the texture is like if you want to. That's actually giving us great information too. So me as a clinician, I love to know like all of these things, but that's helpful information potentially. And then you usually have, depending on how long someone's follicular phase is, there's usually some dry days in there. Some people have shorter follicular phases, so it just depends. Some dry days in there. And then you'll start to see your mucus changing. Often, if there's a healthy ovulation happening, you'll start to see your mucus changing. You might see some like rubber cementiness. You might see some creaminess. It might look a little bit like yogurt or cottage cheese. That's totally like, it is not abnormal to have some of this stuff. Some people think that they have recurrent yeast infections every single month because they're like noticing their cervical mucus because they just have copious amounts amounts of it, and it can be completely normal. So if you're not having itching, inflammation, redness, like if it's not smelling yeasty, it might just be your cervical fluid. So like, let's just put that out there. Anyway, as you're heading towards ovulation, then you get to this place where it's like the peak point, and it is so amazing. There's this clear fluid, and sometimes that fluid can actually be stretched. It's stretchy. Sometimes it's just a small amount of clear fluid, but sometimes that fluid can actually be stretched pretty far. It's like egg whites, and people talk about it that way, as like the egg whites before they're cooked, that kind of like really gooey, clear fluid, and that can come out of your vagina. So here we are. I'm just sharing all about it. So that is like you're tracking that, and you're also tracking your temperature that whole time. And then as you ovulate, once you ovulate, that really stretchy fluid, which is your most fertile time, will actually start to die down. You'll start to have actually like more dry days. You might get a little bit of like the creaminess and then head towards dry, but then you're tracking your temperature too, and your temperature will go up. And it doesn't go up a ton. It goes up just, I can't remember how much, but it's like a few points of a degree. That's why you need the basal body thermometer, because that actually does decimal points. So you're checking and your temperature goes up, and for at least 3 days, your temperature is staying up. Then you've ovulated. You've ovulated. And then it continues to stay up. I mean, I really suggest like doing this for at least 3 months to get you near your cycle before you start like trusting this as your birth control method, and maybe even longer depending on the person, because some people's cycles can be complicated. But generally in a normal cycle, the temperature is going to stay up until your hormones drop right before you menstruate. It's going to go down enough that you notice that something is changing. You'll probably also feel it in your body. So that time when it's staying up, after there's 3 days and you've ovulated, it is safe to have unprotected sex if you know that you're not going to end up with a sexually transmitted infection or something. That is like so liberating. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yes. The theme of this podcast episode is just getting to know your body, and then being able to support yourself in that. And then ultimately having that satisfaction of being like, okay, now that I know my body is doing this, I can be more safe with that. Now, I remember having this conversation with someone, and this was before I really even had any awareness of like what a menstrual cycle was. And unfortunately, I was probably still in my mid-30s when I had this conversation. But someone brought up that they like double ovulate. Is that something that you've heard of?
Okay, so there's a couple things that can happen. So it's one of those more complicated cycles. However, what will not happen is that you won't have that rise in temperature for 3 days. You won't have that twice. What could happen is that 2 eggs could be released. It's usually within that same 24, 36-hour period. It's not like this happened a week ago and now it's happening now. It's usually in that same period, and then you're going to watch for your temperature rise. So that's really important. However, there is a phenomenon that can happen where the body will start to try to ovulate, and you might start seeing your fertile mucus, but you're not going to fully ovulate. That could happen, and then maybe something wonky goes on. You end up kind of getting dry days again, and then you finally have your like real ovulation. So what you can see, and sometimes that happens in perimenopause or with irregular cycles, but often more in like perimenopausal years or even puberty years, that can happen a lot. So that is what you will potentially see, is like this trying and then not happening, and then maybe the real happening. You're not actually going to ovulate twice. There are multiple eggs that can be released. Yeah, okay, but it's in the same period of time. That's how twins, those what are they called? The kind of twins that are not the same from the same egg.
Okay, that's good, because like that still haunts me a little bit in the back of my head. Was like, is that a possibility? So that makes me feel a lot better that it's not like 2 separate times. It's like your body's like, you're gonna ovulate. Wait, nope, we're gonna wait a little bit, and then it's a few days later. So thank you for clearing that up. Welcome to Flourish, the channel that guides you on a transformative journey towards spiritual wisdom, self-development, and healing practices, all aimed at elevating your intuition and aligning you with your soul's purpose. I'm your host, Kara Dempsey, and I'm thrilled to have you joining me as we learn together. Please subscribe and share this with a friend to help grow my channel. I appreciate you, and we'll chat soon.